Hello and welcome to the Vedic Conversation, where each episode we take a different topic and look at it through the lens of storytelling and from the perspective of the Veda, an ancient but still very much relevant body of knowledge from India. I'm Rory Kinsella, a Vedic meditation teacher based in Sydney, and I'm joined by my Vedic colleagues Anthony Thompson in London and Derrick Yanford in New York. And in this episode, we're mixing things up again and putting each other on the spot with some unscripted Q&A. This week, we dive into a few juicy topics, starting with what each of us thinks is the most pressing need of the time and how we're addressing it both personally and professionally. We also delve into what our wildest meditation experiences have been, and you'll want to stick around to hear Anthony's answer, which is really something quite special. And then Derrick gets us to think about an event in our lives that at first seemed unfavourable, but later turned out to be the best thing that could have happened. So, enjoy the show.
So my first question is to Rory, and it is, what are the needs of the time and how are you addressing them professionally and personally?
Good question. So the needs of the time, I guess, just for context for our listeners, this is a kind of key Vedic question that meditating puts us in a place where we can answer the need of the time, and the need of the time changes minute to minute to minute, second to second. How am I addressing it? So I guess in a kind of career sense, becoming a meditation teacher is obviously what I'm doing, and that's translating the benefits that I got from meditation into things that I can share with other people and get other people feeling more calm, speculating less about the future. But I guess you're aiming at something more current. The questioner asks the question and then stays silent.
It's up to you. It's up to you how you wish to interpret it.
Yeah.
I'm not attached, Rory. I'm not attached to the question.
You're not rigidly attached to it. So I guess since the pandemic, meditation's become more key. We're lucky in Australia that we've not had to social distance or lockdown as much, especially in Sydney. We haven't had to social distance as much as other places. So continuing to teach normally as much as I can. That's how I'm answering the need of the time, getting out there teaching. And I guess over the last couple of years, my teaching has gone more towards, meditation is meditation and it will help an infinite number of woes you might have. But, as individual teachers and just people in the world, it helps to pick a certain tack to go down. So mine is the alcohol tack, and I just find that the more I do that, the more, I guess, response I get, and the more I'm able to talk to people directly. So me answering the need of the time, and who's to say how long this time may last, but presenting the benefits of meditation through that lens of how it can help you stop drinking. And that's from any amount of drinking. So when I was a drinker, I didn't drink every day. I have drunk every day in the past, but I was more of a binge drinker at the weekend. And rather than thinking about drinking as this binary thing of I'm a normal drinker or I'm an alcoholic, thinking about it more as in, do I get the benefits from alcohol that I signed up for? If I'm having a glass of wine, only one glass of wine in the evening, is that actually relaxing me? If I have two glasses, is it affecting my sleep? What my general energy levels like? And then just translating my, basic human experience into allowing other people to see meditation through that lens of this is a current way that you use to relax, which is a glass of wine. Here's another way, which is much cheaper, will actually deliver the benefits you think you're getting from that glass of wine, and yeah, allow you to be more healthy and have enough time and energy to follow up those other things in your life that you want to do. So answering the needs of the time in a rambly kind of ways, it will be meditation for many years to come for me, because I don't think that's going away. I like to quote this stat that what is it? The World Health Organization called stress the health epidemic of the 21st century. This is pre-COVID that they said that, but that's not going away. It's even got worse, if anything. So answering that need, and then continuing to do it through whatever ways seem relevant at the time for me, which at the moment is through this alcohol lens.
Thanks, Derrick. Can I ask you the same question, which is, what are the needs of the time, and how are you addressing them personally and professionally?
Great question. It's interesting because it feels like a loaded question in a way, but what I remind myself of, what that answer is particular to each person. So what my answer would be will resonate with what I'm perceiving in the world. And someone sitting next to me could give an answer that's completely different than mine, even though we might be experiencing time simultaneously, but depending on what they're perceiving or what they're picking up, they're going to have a completely different answer. So when I remember that, I'm like, okay, it's not really that loaded. It actually has to do with my own personal experience. And so taking it down that notch, professionally, I think the most relevant thing and the need of the time that's asking of me that I find that I'm working on is figuring out a way to deliver or share the knowledge with not as many people as possible, but with the people that I am doing it with currently in a more refined manner, either using less words or less time and getting the same point across in a more digestible and crystal clear fashion. I'm trying to distill the way I teach so that it's a little bit more, people are picking it up a little bit more quickly. And I think what that looks like for me as a process is editing a little bit, taking out things that are not necessary and not overcomplicating it. And also, I think listening a little bit more to my students, because I think when I first started teaching, you have all this stuff you want to share and you believe all of it is relevant. And the conundrum you get into is you're trying to pour the ocean into a bucket. And you feel like this is your job, and you feel like, how do I do that? And I'm coming to realize you cannot do that. That's a recipe for failure. So what can you do? Only pour into the bucket what the bucket can handle. But what does that look like? Well, you probably have to listen to your students a bit more to see what they're asking about what they get and they don't get. Because you could say something that's very clear to a group of people, and that same phrase is completely not resonating with someone else. So I need to be able to detect how the way I'm teaching is actually being received, and understand that is always going to be different with every group that I'm in front of. But hopefully with each time that I'm doing it, I'm learning, okay, this is really hitting the nail on the head. This needs a little bit more tweaking. And that's I'm going to be a work in progress, and I'm okay with that. But knowing that, this is going to be something that's going to be happening for the rest of my career. I think personally, the thing that's most relevant for me is or the need of the time is asking me to look at more closely is definitely unpacking, examining, and exposing my implicit and explicit bias around everything, which seems overwhelming. But for the sake of today's topic, I'll give you an example. So, I used to live in New York City, and living in a large metropolis like that, there are times where ignorance is needed. You have to ignore certain things that are going around you, because if you were to involve yourself in it, it can be completely overwhelming. And so it's a habit that I have of, okay, there's some drama going on over there. Don't make eye contact, because making eye contact, you can be inviting that to come over your way. But now that I'm living in Florida, I was at the beach today, was driving around with the top down. I came to a stoplight, it was in a convertible. And this happened the other day too. And there was a gentleman at the light who was walking up with a sign. Said something like he was homeless, he probably needed money. And my knee-jerk reaction was to cut him out of my line of sight, was to ignore him. And then when I did it, I was going, why are you doing that? Is it knee-jerk? Do you not want to acknowledge that somebody is in a position that they're in? Because you have some money, you could give him. And I started to have all of these thoughts about, should I give him money? Should I feel guilty for not? Do I have food? Should I pull up? Like all of these different things. And it made me start to go, what other things are you ignoring, or you just either carrying over from being in New York, or that in society, you just, I'm sure I had all of these thoughts about, why is he homeless? What does he deserve to be in the position, like all these kinds of things. And I think the vision that I have for a better version of myself is one that can recognize, Derrick, the reason you're behaving the way that you are is because something in the way you were raised or conditioned is running a program that either you weren't aware when it was put in, or it's just been your normal for so long that it's actually time to re-examine that. I think the pandemic has brought us that gift of re-examination. And with the conversations that I'm having with people and listening, I understand that I have bias everywhere. And I think, as human beings, it's part of how we survive in the world. When you look at a person, you make all kinds of judgments and assessments about them. But now that, there's so much conversation about representation in film and seeing yourself on screen and why you're not seeing yourself and all of these other things, that you just inherently start to either think that these are facts, which they're just, it's just your conditioning. I'm realizing I have so much work to do, especially because in the spaces and the conversations that I'm having right now are largely about race, and hearing my white participants talk about the work that they're doing to unpack their bias, recognizing I'm also white. I may be a person of color, I may be perceived as and pass as a person of color, but I'm just as much white as I am black. So what bias do I have in my own whiteness or my blackness, or the marriage of those two things? Because there is a part of me that doesn't want to acknowledge the whiteness, the privilege that I have being white too, And I guess yesterday, really, to be honest, we were talking about this, and the thing that I came to realize is I've often been in spaces where I'm the only person of color, or I'm the only boy. Growing up as a dancer, I was around females. So that was natural for me. And also amongst white people, that was natural for me. So I think one of the biases that I built in was that it is regular for you to be in a space where people do not look like you. And so with that meant, if there are other people of color who are in those spaces, I think that they should behave or have the same attitude that I have, because I've dealt with it my whole life, where Why do you feel that way? That person may not have any kind of experience of that on a regular basis like you have. And so now I'm like, oh, right. There's all this assumption that I've made about who's having what experience and why that I've never given enough thought to, the need of the time is saying, I'm hearing people say the way, especially in America, the way we're being looked at and we've been treated has to be re-examined. And it really starts with yours truly. And so I'm a little scared, to be honest, to do the work. But I think that's nature's way of saying, that's why you got to do it.
No, that's beautiful. That's great. So, guys, do you want me to give my yes, you're both nodding. Rory and Derrick would like me to give an answer to my own question. So, what am I doing about the needs of the time, and how am I addressing them personally and professionally? Well, I think one of the fascinating things about this past year with various lockdowns, quite severe lockdowns that we've had in the UK, and we're in the middle of probably the longest and hardest lockdown so far, but the light is at the end of the tunnel in about 6 months' time. And I've taken this opportunity to work on myself. It's been the most fantastic gift to spend time and actually work out a program of investigation, of thought, of contemplation. And because we're all in solitude, that is an easier process than perhaps it would be otherwise. And so I've done a lot of reading. I've done a lot of listening. I've pushed myself in various directions, learning more, not only about meditation, but also science, about the way the brain works, about the way the human condition has changed and altered. One of the books that I found most fascinating and influential in this period was Yuval Harari's Homo Sapiens, which threw a light on so many aspects of my conditioning and my biases. And instead of beating myself up about those, realizing that actually this is part of my DNA, this is part of my 300,000-year-old heritage. And if I think I can adjust that or tweak that, I've got another thought coming. But at least being conscious of it and being aware of it, this is really important. So I think from a personal point of view, I've enjoyed doing that. I've enjoyed as a teacher, we can meditate for longer and more often. And I've enjoyed doing that too, and some of the other advanced techniques that are available. I've been making full use of those very much more regularly than I have in the past. From a professional point of view, one of the things that has caused me great pain is witnessing my students on Zoom calls suffering. And it's extremely difficult in this kind of situation where we're screen to screen or eye to camera, and to really give people the kind of support that you would if you were meeting face to face. That's not to say necessarily that you give them a hug or touch them, but it's the pheromones, it's the body language, it's the way that you're looking at them and they're looking at you, and there's that subliminal communication which is incredibly important, which just isn't taking place. And in the second lockdown, which was in the late summer, people were really suffering from mental health issues. The stress, the strain was really getting to them. And I felt very deeply for these people. And whilst I'm not qualified as a therapist to help them in any way, I could at least support them as a friend, as a teacher, and just as a human being. And it was important to set an example, to be an exemplar, to be able to compassionately share with them some of the things that I do, some of the approaches that I take, which help me stay on the straight and narrow. And all of us have been, from a sort of mental point of view, been on a bit of a roller coaster. But I can honestly say that I got off extremely lightly, and I'm not ashamed to say this, but I've actually had a good time of this, because I've been able to look after people, I've been able to look after myself, and I haven't kind of dipped below the surface. And so, it's giving people a sense of stability, some certainty, and then showing how we can be adaptable, that the uncertainty is something that we can actually thrive on, that the ever-repeating known, even in a lockdown, tedious as it may be, mind-numbing as it may be, actually presents opportunities. And it's when we integrate that uncertainty that we then start to make a connection with ourselves. And of course, if we're maintaining our meditation twice daily, we are having that opportunity to connect with our deeper selves, and that ocean of calmness and tranquility and stability. And then out of that comes a feeling of purification, that you've washed out all the troubles that are out there. And it's then that you can grow, that you can move forward from a position of strength, and that you can reach out for things knowing that you have the confidence and the ability to get it. And the journey is as important as the destination, that whole process of realizing that you've got to dig deep here, because all your support systems have basically disappeared, or they've become electronic and they've changed. And so the one thing that you can rely on is yourself. And that may mean having to adjust your behavior. Maybe it means taking more exercise indoors if you're not allowed out, reducing certain intakes of unsustainable liquids and solids, perhaps choosing a better diet, getting more sleep, and so on and so forth. And so looking at all aspects of one's life, and in a sense doing a little exfoliation, and perhaps even social exfoliation, that we find that actually those people that we used to hang out with, right now we don't feel quite so close to anymore, or perhaps they've moved off in a different direction. Maybe there are things that we've been doing in our life which are no longer sustainable. And so I think by setting an example and showing people how I've done it, that's helped them. And so that's how I've been addressing the needs of this particular time.
Beautiful.
Great. Next question. All right, I have one for us, which will by default go to Derrick. Okay, so the question I want to ask you is, what is your wildest meditation experience?
Two come to mind, and I think I'm gonna blend them maybe a little bit because they're similar. Yeah, because I'll go with this one. So I learned to meditate from Michael Miller, and after the fourth day, I was convinced that I wanted to teach. It was really profound, and I was having, pretty, what I thought were amazing experiences, going deeper, all of those things that people report when they first learn. I think it was 4 years later, I had my first advanced technique with him. And I wasn't really sure what to expect, and I'm not even quite sure what kind of nudged me to do it, other than I was simply curious. I'd heard other people talk about getting one. He was in town. He lives in London, but he was in New York, and I was like, let's go for it. So, and I guess really, I thought, what difference is there going to be? I remember the room that we were in. I think it might have been Robbie Hammond's old apartment, actually. And it was beautiful. And he gave me the advanced technique. And I think everybody was learning an advanced technique as well. We closed our eyes and we meditated. And it wasn't so much what happened in the meditation as when I opened my eyes, I was rip shit pissed, because it was in that moment that I was like, I'm not going to curse, but I want to. I was like, oh, I'm back on Earth again. Like, I'm going to do all the things that I was doing before, because whatever had happened, I felt like I was not an earthling. I was not on the planet. I was not having anything like the human experience that I was now having with my eyes opened. And I was really upset about it. It was uncomfortably like upsetting, to the point where I was like, I don't want to be here. I really don't. This isn't funny. Kind of a thing. Also because I felt like I don't know what the experience was that I was having, but I also was like, am I going to be trying to chase that now? Am I going to now be looking for every time that I sit down to have this amazing, mind-blowing experience, to only open my eyes again and have this really upsetting kind of experience? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the second time. So there was this other time where I was sick, and my voice, when I get emotional, my voice is the first thing to go. And so I was having an experience where I was having like a lot of colors and stuff, and I was not feeling well, and all this stuff started to come up, and I thought that I either needed to cough or I wasn't going to allow myself to cough, and so I was suppressing it a bit, and I started crying. I just started crying, and there were colors. I remember a lot of purples. There were colors, and it was like somebody ripped open a hole, and all this crap that needed to come out. Because I suppress things normally, I think, as a human being. The way that I was raised. And there was something tied with that wanting to suppress and knowing that I didn't have to, and being ill. It was a little out of body. I felt like I witnessed myself a little bit, because I was like, I'm also not quick to cry. And it was like running down my face. And so it was in that moment too, it was so healing that I knew that it was going to come to an end. So I was regretting that it was going to be over, because I was like, I haven't felt anything like that. Because my meditations, I think, for the most part, are unremarkable. But those are the two that stand out like that. It was really, really, really something else.
Awesome. Anthony, in your 50-year meditation career, what are your top 5? What one per decade?
Oh God, I can't remember that far back.
Start with the 70s.
Psycho 70s, yeah. Okay. Actually, my wildest experience, my wildest meditation, took place about 18 months ago. I haven't told anybody about this except for two people who are very, very close to me. As I said in the answer to the previous question, I've spent a lot of time doing some research and reading texts and all sorts of things that every Vedic meditation teacher shows on their recommended book list. And I wanted to find out more about Gurudev, who is our spiritual teacher. And I had been reading some of his discourses, and I managed to find online recordings of him singing and giving speeches. And I spent probably the best part of a day listening and watching and getting interpretations and working out where it was, when it was, what was being said, what was going on, what was the context. And then, the next day I carried on doing something else and this, that, and the other. And then about 10 days later, I had the most extraordinary experience in a meditation. I was no longer where I was, and I had moved into a place which I can only, this is so difficult to verbalize, to describe. I moved into a place which was Gurudev. It was as though I had entered his body and he was kind of wrapping his arms around me. And it didn't feel strange. It didn't feel peculiar. It felt completely normal. It was joyous. And I have no idea how long it lasted for. And when I came out of my meditation, I was kind of in a state of shock is not the right word, but I was kind of, in a sense, paralyzed, slightly paralyzed by the experience, numbed by the experience. That's probably the best way to describe it, numbed by the experience. And this was an early morning meditation. And as part of my morning routine, I go for a 45, 60-minute walk. And it took the best part of that walk to disengage myself from that state, or to become disengaged from that state. And, looking back on it, I can see that obviously, listening to him talking and singing and spending a whole day immersed in that, had a very profound effect on me. But there seemed to be a delayed reaction. And 2 days later, I was overcome by the whole experience. I was, in my meditation, I was crying. I felt very unsettled by the experience. I didn't really know what to make of it, other than the obvious connection that, oh, well, I had somehow been impressed by what I'd heard and seen. Now that some time has passed, I think I see more about why that happened. And it probably will never happen again. Who knows?
Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev.
What do you see with a bit more distance?
I think that when I'm practicing the puja, when I'm doing puja, our special ceremony, there is no difference. There is no other. It's a complete connection. And, I find puja very, very powerful. And, I have to take care. I have to take care. I have to be mindful of what's going on. This is something that's increased in the last 2-3 years. And, that's all I can say really about it.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, because in puja we're invoking these people, and if I hadn't learnt this technique, I'd think invoking as in like invoking a the devil or invoking a spirit who might even possess you. So I guess this is kind of that way where we can inhabit different things in consciousness. Everything exists. Everything is structured in consciousness. And yeah, you got to visit the Guru Dev location.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want our listeners and viewers to kind of get freaked out by what I said, but I mean, I was asked a direct question, and I wanted to give an honest answer. And I'm sure many other people have had this experience too, and will have this experience. But I just thought I'd share it with you.
Beautiful. Well,
What's your answer?
I'm gonna struggle to follow that one. But for me, yeah, most of my wildest meditation experiences were near the beginning of when I learned, and maybe it's because when we teach, we're actively asking people after each meditation to describe it. So maybe it was because I was more aware, and I'm conscious of this when I ask people. I'm like, sorry, this is an unnatural part of your meditation career where I'm asking you to be conscious of what's going on, to then report back on it after, so that we can adjust your technique. So maybe it's because of that. But in the 4-session course, when I learned with my teacher Tim, Derrick, as you were saying, I had lots of visual stuff, and I also hear this from students that they have quite visual early meditations. I never have visual ones now, but lots of really bright colours and really vivid scenes. Like at that time I was writing my novel that I mentioned earlier that was set in Siberia, and I was in this snow-capped landscape just kind of looking around. And not that I'd go, oh, I wonder where I'd like to be or anything like that. That was just something that spontaneously came. So lots of these visual experiences. I've also had in that 4 sessions, had my own experience of a big Kundalini energy release, where I had this kind of surge of energy start somewhere in my body and fly up through my body and kind of out my neck, which my teacher described as, that's Kundalini release. We talk about stress release as kind of thinking about that email that you forgot to send. But this was much more visceral, like there's some energy in here. It's like a tennis ball of energy, and I felt it as a heat, and it kind of flew up. Never had it since, but it was really interesting that was in that 4 sessions. And then also quite early in my meditation career, I used to get these awesome feeling experiences. So like Derrick said, my meditation's now kind of fairly unremarkable day to day, and it'll either be shallow or I'll transcend and not know anything about it. But during those early phases, I had much more of what I guess is like a Ritam experience on the cusp, where I would feel that I was moving into this unbounded area. And for me, it felt like, if any of you watched the old Star Trek TV show, where they would be in the transporter room, and they would kind of fizz out when they went down to the planet, and it would in my diary, that's how I describe it. I kind of would fizz out, and I'd be like, oh, I'm 80% there, 70% there, 60% there, and it would be such an amazing feeling to be mid fizz. And I guess when I allowed it to go, I would transcend, but I would often get too excited about it. I'd be like, oh, this is amazing. So I would, and as you were also saying, Derrick, I would often then want to chase that experience. So then it becomes not effortless. I'm holding an expectation that there's an experience I'd like to have, but it just used to feel amazing, kind of a euphoric thing. If I kind of managed to stay on that cusp, it would feel really euphoric. And then as a teacher, my wildest experience was I was teaching this guy one-on-one session 1. So I'd given him his mantra, we'd done the puja, and we sat down for the longer meditation, the 15-minute meditation. And maybe about 6 or 7 minutes in, because I'll open my eyes briefly to have a little look, make sure he's not leaning his head back or anything like that. And he stood up, bolt upright, and kind of looking really surprised. And I kind of shut my eyes, pretended I didn't see him, and pretended nothing had happened. And he sat back down and carried on. And at the end, I was like, okay, and how was the experience? and he'd admitted to me that he'd done quite a few drugs in his time, and I've noticed that meditators who've done quite a lot of drugs will have these stress release meditations. I think even in the teaching manual it says there's lots of stuff about people who've done too much LSD because it was popularized in the 60s and they'd be flipping out on the floor, which I guess is related to this. But he described it that he was on this kind of roller coaster going down, I guess, through consciousness, and he reached the end. And when he reached the end, he just stood up. But he seemed to enjoy it. So I think it may be that, in those beginning phases of meditation, that's maybe a key time to have these different experiences. But the point is, we're not in control of our meditation experience, and it's kind of, I guess, a little bit dangerous to try and hold on to these. And I guess we're talking about this because it's an interesting question, but it is important to remember that, most meditations are unremarkable functional things, and we don't meditate for amazing experiences. We meditate to feel better generally, but it's also to show how powerful a tool this thing is that can just go open this door to this expanse of consciousness that we don't understand. Nobody understands it. Science doesn't understand it. But we have a way of exploring it.
Absolutely. That's a crazy story. I don't have, as a teacher, I don't have any crazy stand-up freak out ones yet, but I will keep you posted.
Me neither.
I should get a seatbelt for that.
Buckle
Strap
up.
yourself in. Strap yourself in. You're going on a ride.
Oxygen masks may drop.
Beautiful. Okay, I'm going to launch into my question, and I think I'm going to start with Anthony first. So, Anthony, describe an event in your life that at first seemed negative or unfavorable, but actually turned out to be the best thing that could have ever happened to you. Go with that one.
I think I've been too candid already this evening.
No such thing. No such thing.
The
Let it all
best
out.
thing.
It's just us.
It's just us. Yeah. The best thing. Phew. I think when I was made redundant the week before Christmas 1990, I had 2 small children under the age of 4. There was a recession going on. People were losing their jobs left, right, and center. Businesses were collapsing. It was pretty scary. And I'm going to slightly flip your question around because, I was kind of paid off. I was a director of this company. They paid me off. They paid me to go away. And I had various benefits which were still in place for the following 6 months, which kind of cushioned the blow. But I wasn't really kind of interested in that because I saw that there was really a space in the market for me to fill. And I was under an enormous amount of pressure. Obviously, my wife at the time was extremely concerned about our financial future. I obviously felt responsibility towards her and my children to ensure that we tried to maintain our standard of living. And it was kind of waiting and looking around and waiting for the right moment to make investigations as to where I could apply my skill set. And I always remember sitting next to somebody at a dinner party, a lady at a dinner party, and she said to me, this is a great moment in your life. I said, you're right. She said, you should just leave everything and take your family and go traveling around the world. And my immediate reaction was, no, I can't do that. No. I have to stay here. I've got so many responsibilities, so many outgoings. I couldn't possibly just run away from it all. And the answer was I never did go around the world with my family. But it got me thinking about what I was attached to. And, meditation really, really helped me get a grip on that. And it was like needs must, right now I have to do this, even if I don't really want to do it. And, I kind of looked at all sorts of jobs, driving trucks and making deliveries. And I was going to start up a kind of home food delivery business, for my neighborhood. Boy, I could have been, that could have been interesting if I developed that one, but I was probably about 10 years too soon. And it was this difficult thing of wanting to get going, but there was nothing to get going with, or there was plenty to get going for, but there was the vehicle hadn't presented itself, and so I had to be really, really creative, but I had to be patient. And so, out of this kind of dark period, which lasted for about 6 months, I was kind of trying to work all the angles, and there was no slack anywhere. Nobody was giving anybody any opportunities. And in the end, I just kind of went for it. Having just kind of felt that I had the confidence, I had the knowledge, I had the client base, and it was that sense of self-belief. And my meditation empowered me just to take the plunge and get going. And that, it was very rough going to begin with, but after about 3 years, it really started to motor, and it was great, and looking back, it was probably, whilst the being made redundant was extremely painful, it was probably the best thing that happened to me at that moment in my life, because it gave me a kick in the pants, made me reassess everything, made me understand what I was attached to. Was that relevant? Was it sustainable? And then having this fantastic tussle between what I had to do to meet the need of the time, and then what was it that I would like to do. And eventually I managed to get it to the point where I was doing what I would like to do, and put all my energy and enthusiasm and passion into that, and that turned out to be a success.
Beautiful. Rory, same question. Describe an event in your life that you experienced at first that seemed unfavorable or negative, but actually turned out to be the best thing that could have happened.
Yeah, okay, good one. And I may have touched on this before, but I think, it's good for these kind of questions to think about big life events. So I guess you did losing your job or changing careers, and I guess mine's similar along those lines. Like when I moved to London when I was 28, I'd been living in Birmingham where I went to uni. I moved to London, and it was kind of this big, let's embark on a career now. And I'd been doing music, trying to be in a band and have a record label, and spent most of my 20s trying to make it as a musician. And then I went to London. It took me months and months and months to get a job, and I had all of these interviews where I was like, oh, this could be amazing. And the one that in particular was, I got really close to getting a job at Arena magazine, which is a now defunct kind of classy men's magazine, kind of like GQ. And it was a sub-editor role, so that, you know, the people who write the headlines and check all the facts and make sure all the sentences are nice and concise. And I got really close to getting it. I was in the last two and didn't get it. I didn't get it in the end. And I was just like, oh, after like, it'd been like 10 months of not working, and I'd done all this extra journalism qualifications and all this stuff, and then to not get it, I was like, oh, it was the closest I got. But then through, you know, the power of the universe, the guy who didn't give me the role recommended me for this other role, which was working for Channel 4 as on their website as a music journalist. And I was like, well, this is way better than you know, this is right up my street. I've just spent the last 10 years doing music stuff, and now I get paid to do music stuff again. And it was just like such an amazing, because it was direct, like the guy recommended me. It was the same guy who turned me down who then recommended me. So it was like the connection was so pronounced between those things, one of which was a kind of failure, personal failure, and the other one was just opening up this new door. And then although the other opportunity at the beginning, I think it was only a week, it was 2 weeks cover for someone, and it turned into a 3-year job. And it was just like a 3-year job that I decided to leave when I moved to Australia. But it just kind of shows that we have no idea how things are going to turn out. And I guess I always talk about this with my students, and it's part of our knowledge that talks about how, yeah, evolution is not this clear graph, that gradient that nicely goes up. It's plateau, status quo, dip, higher status quo, dip, higher status quo. And it's easy for us to bury ourselves in those dips and be like, oh no, this is awful, I'm going to pull all the earth down on me and sulk for ages. But it's knowing that, or trusting that there's another rise coming, and keeping our eyes open to see what it might be, and not extending that dip, but knowing that it's a natural thing, and that we can't go plateau, or just straight up. It's just not natural. It's gonna go down. There's gonna be a dip, because things don't end without a dip generally. So it's as I get older, it's knowing that that's how things work, and knowing that for myself, but also being able to help other people, like in a kind of Vedic way, by just pointing out that is the pattern, and to know that there's something more positive coming further ahead, and there's a higher status quo to come.
Gorgeous.
Lovely.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I asked the question really is because I felt like, you know, we do talk about that a lot with our students, and I wanted to put it into context a little bit more, because, you know, everybody hears this silver lining kind of a thing, but I think it all has to do with perspective. You know, you can always write yourself as the victim or the victor in the scene, and it depends on your state of consciousness. But usually, we say hindsight is 20/20, so we can look at something that happened and then go, oh yeah, it probably couldn't have happened any better if we tried. And for me, that event was when I was a junior in high school. I competed as a dancer growing up, and my teacher was an acrobat, so all of us knew how to tumble. And she was also very competitive. And so we were at a competition, and we were against a rival school. And I remember the stage was just really large, it was very long. And back in the day, at that time, most stages were just hardwood. Now there's like a marley over the floor. This was a beautiful, and that's how I grew up dancing. I learned on hardwood. This was a beautiful, long, hardwood stage that I loved. And we were doing our acro number. And I just, I had a little extra to it. So I wanted to, show off or whatnot. And I did this pass. And when I landed, I broke my foot. And from what people tell me, they could hear it snap. But there's so much adrenaline pumping at the time that you're not aware. And because of I'm used to landing that way, I didn't think much of it. I finished the routine. I came off stage and I was like, yeah, it kind of hurts. But I ended up performing again. And it was an interesting situation because my teacher, she was young. She's only 10 years older than I was. So I was like 17. She was 27. And she kind of didn't, I supposedly, as the story goes, I didn't react as though I was in a lot of pain that my foot was broken. So she wasn't really sure. She didn't know how to gauge it. And so I did another number and I had to lift a girl over my head. But I left limping. Like I could not get through it. So I ended up watching the rest of the competition and she took me to the hospital later that evening, found out it was broken and she felt terrible about it. So I got a pin put in my foot and I was out for most of the season. And I was kind of devastated because the year before I was in a national competition. I came in third and I felt like I had put so much work into this year. And now that chance was gone because I wasn't able to qualify. And it was, I don't know, I've been dancing for however long and I couldn't do it anymore. So the good thing was I went to every class I normally would have gone to as a spectator. And being in that position of not being able to dance but to watch, I learned in a very different way that it was actually necessary. So when I got the pin pulled back and I could start dancing again, I actually ended up, I was back at the tail end of the competition season and I had like one of the best years I ever had. I had won like a 4-way scholarship. I ended up competing in a different national title competition and I had won that one. And there was like all of these things that had happened, especially the year after. So the year after, I had the chance to go for this title I didn't have the chance the year before, and I ended up winning. And I don't know, well, actually I do know. Had I qualified the year that I broke my foot, I would not have won because the guy who won was phenomenal. He was phenomenal. There was like no way in hell that I would have won. So having that moment of like, oh my God, I'm in the middle of the season. I've worked so hard. I can't get this thing that I want, blah, 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 blah. Not that I was poor me, but I definitely had a pity party for myself. Later on turned out to, winning that title, my senior year of high school and then going on to college and how it kind of opened up a whole bunch of doors for me and really, in a large sense, kind of launched my career because as the title holder, I was invited to come and perform at other chapters across the country. So a lot of people got to know who I was and all this kind of stuff. So I got a lot of jobs from doing that. And plus it was a huge confidence boost and like all these other things. And so, I also coupled that with, I stayed back in the second grade. I was held back. That was at a time where that was still done. And I don't know that I was even, mature enough to understand what any of that meant. But as I got a little older, I was always like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be in the grade up ahead. It just started to make sense. And now looking back, I'm like, thank God they kept me back. Thank God I broke my foot. You know what I mean? Like without all of those events, I wouldn't be where I was or where I am now currently, even with like other jobs that I have taken. But I just remember, thinking, breaking your foot in the middle of the season, and there was this air of disappointment, because it was like restaging those dances. I was the only boy, so a lot of dances like centered around me, and now I was out, and so I took on a lot of guilt kind of for letting my team down or whatnot. But looking back, it couldn't have happened in any, everything happens really. It's hard for me to say everything happens for a reason because I say that so often and people like will come at me and say, really? I'm going through all this agony. There's a reason for this. And then again, it always comes back to perspective for me, because I could continue and look at all the negative things about that. You know what I mean? But I think the other great thing it's offered me is when I'm in another time of struggle and I can't get the things I want, or I seem like I'm being held back, it is for some realization that I'm going to come to. Hopefully it just happens a little bit quicker. I'm getting to the realization of the benefit during it instead of after. And I think that's one of the biggest gift meditation and my practice has given me, is to recognize in the moment how you're never anywhere but where you're supposed to be, regardless of what it feels like. And so the beauty I have now is to change the dynamic of it in that moment, to getting it to serve me. And I wanted to ask that question because I didn't want it to become this thing that my students always hear. You know, the silver lining story, we always hear that. I wanted to make it a little bit more practical for people to go, okay, yeah, I can relate to that. So
that's a beautiful story. But I think, Derrick, what it also reveals is that at that young age, when you were 17, before you had started to meditate, that you showed great emotional intelligence. You know, that your approach and your understanding of what had happened, maybe at the time some grief, but then quite quickly afterwards you saw the context and you saw the benefits of this horrible accident, and it all then played out in a more delightful way.
You know, it's funny because my best friend, I had a friend, Rebecca. We were partners. We used to do duets together. And I remember her saying at one point, oh, what a good sport. You came to every class. You never got, you never looked like you were upset. And I kept thinking, well, first of all, there's nowhere else I would want to be. I'm not going to be home on the couch because I don't see how that would serve me. And two, I started to recognize very early the first time because I also, I started dancing late for competitive boy, whatever. And so I was playing catch up. Like my first ballet class, I had no idea what was going on. And the second year I was competing, I was like, I had no idea what was going on. I was literally just imitating what was going on around me. So this is the first time that I was able to hear and look at things happening in a way that I could have some space to process and digest. And the thing that I recognized was I was hearing things come out of my teacher's mouth and watching people not take that correction. That I probably, if I'd been in the class, I might, because you have all this other stuff that you're doing that's going on. You think that you're taking the correction, but you're not. And I watched it and I'm like, nobody's doing what she asked for, So I felt like I got the biggest lesson and I was fascinated by it as well. And I think also, when you're in the thick of learning or whatnot, and it's a day in, day out thing, you get tired. Your mind, your body gets tired. I had so much energy because my body was just like wanting to do it so badly. And I mean, I know I've heard of people who, there was a guy who, he was arrested and I don't know how many years he spent in prison, but every day in his mind, he imagined playing the perfect round of golf. And when he got out, that's exactly what he did. I don't even know that he was a golfer, you know what I mean? But he just, in his mind, he saw what all the steps were or whatnot. And so, I mean, the blessing too is like, injury is a very common thing for dancers. And I often share that story with my students who are also feeling like bummed out because they're out of competition now. And it's like, you don't know it now, but this is the best thing, because your body, just like everything, this is my why, this is my reason. The doctor was like, you have stress fractures in both of your feet already. You were pushing your body to the limit and your body said, this is enough. We're going to stop you. You actually need this. So when a break happens or when you're ill, when this unfortunate event happens, it's a lot of ways nature's way of protecting you and preserving you and saying, if you're not going to stop, we're going to stop you. You know, and if we can reframe these negative experiences in that way, that it is actually for our own good, then you can start to see why that's true. But I think that's why it's important to have these conversations and put color and context around that. So it's not just something our students hear the teachers talking about, but that it's actually a thing that we've experienced ourselves.
Okay, thanks for sticking around until the end. Now, this season we would love to know what topics and themes would be of interest to you, and also would you like to be our guest? Perhaps you might be interested in coming and talking to us yourself. We'd love to have you. Please share your thoughts and ideas with us with a direct message on Instagram or by emailing us at stories@thevediconversation.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating and review so that other people can find us. See you next time.